This video is based off of Tier Zoo. Many modern players like to take for granted all the awesome things about this game, like for example the great graphics as well as the complex dynamics between different builds. However, it wasn't always like this. In fact, most of the game's history was composed of mindless XP farming. The game was rapidly losing popularity. Developer needed to do something quick, so they decided to bless the game with eyes. Now, light receptors always existed to a certain extent. NPCs sometimes even have them. However, the simple light receptors can only differentiate between light and dark, but more complex eyes can differentiate between different directions. And this is what created the Cambrian expansion. Haikouickthys is an AFK build. I am not fond of AFK builds. AFK builds have no agency for whether or not they get a game over before finishing the main questline, which leads me to place them firmly in F tier. However, one thing you should know is that the Cambrian Meta game has a heavy emphasis on whoever has the strongest armor, because at the time there was a lack of any anti-armor strats. Haikouickthys has none of this and only spec'd slightly into spikes, which doesn't help against many of the players with disjointed attacks. Speaking of spikes, the first serious member of our tier list is Hallucigenia. Hallucigenia actually is one of the first builds to spec and specialize specifically to counter sea sponges. I actually have quite a bit of respect for a sponge player base, despite being an AFK faction, because these are some of the most dedicated veterans the game has ever seen. Hallucigenia is still, in my eyes, low tier for aforementioned weaknesses. At least it can move, though. Speaking of spikes, the first character I consider to be able to use spikes effectively is Morella. I say this because Morella is in the Arthropoda faction, giving it a exoskeletal armor, thus allowing it a more well-rounded defense compared to other spikes users. Morella's feather-like appendages also makes it good at farming plankton for XP. I do have to take away some points because it has no eyes, though, which is a huge weakness. In a way, Haikouickthys was the ultimate anti-meta pick. Instead of investing into exoskeletal armor, which was considered common sense at the time, it simply had a rod of cells surrounded by collagen, which allowed it much more flexibility than any exoskeleton could provide, making it have a very high mobility stat for a time. It also single-handedly gave way to a new faction, the vertebrates, which have completely dominated the upper weight classes. This is cool and all, but there's a reason why at the time Haikouickthys was considered mid. For one thing, even though its mobility stat was pretty good for a time, wasn't that impressive, and if it did ever get catched, had no means of escape due to its terrible defense, HP, and power sets, other than maybe its slime organs. In addition, jobs weren't added to the game until the Silurian expansion, so Haikouickthys had to scavenge for dead meat or bully players outright or low on health. Therefore, first character on our list that actually gets their XP from hunting other players is Eyesight. Eyesight can be thought of as the gatekeeper to the higher tiers, as its mandibles were perfect for slicing open soft flesh, while its shell was sturdy, it was also light enough to allow it to swim pretty well. However, it still left it with a much lower mobility stat than many of its prey items like Haikouickthys. Addition, fact that there's a critical hit spot just below its shell exposing its vulnerable legs makes it vulnerable to being flipped over by predators. Loaxia was a poop monster that ate bacteria NPCs off the floor. I use poop monster as an umbrella term here because data miners haven't quite figured out what it is. Loaxia gets higher spot than the Tyros and other spikes users mainly because its longer spikes allow them to be less vulnerable to destroyed hitboxes. However, its vulnerability to being flipped over just like Eyesight makes me take away some points from it. With what I said previously about armor, you might be surprised to learn that Anomalocaris, despite not having any armor at all, is considered high B tier. The way I see it though, Anomalocaris can sort of function as if it was a glass cannon, just like modern cephalopod players, even though it doesn't have that high of a power stat, does have the dexterity required to pry open the shells of stuff like clams. So just like Haikouickthys, it was kind of an anti-meta pick. Its tiny defense stat was still a big weakness though, didn't quite spec into all the cool stuff cephalopods have today. Ottobulea is the first Radiodont on our list. If you didn't know, Radiodonts were the OG top tiers, as they mastered the art of armor penetration, which was the most important asset a predator could have at the time. Ottobulea was a perfect example of this, as its trunk not only gave it a telephone grab, but also allowed it to outrange many spikes users. However, you can't deny that its low size made it lose a lot of potential. This brings us to an instant fan favorite, the trilobite. At a time when even basic armor can shrug off most attacks, trilobite decided to go all into its defense, investing a tough carapace and the ability to roll into a ball like many modern bells. The only difference was that at the time, anti-armor techniques were rare, so it was almost like bringing a tank to a fist fight. Of course, when you're at the top, everyone else will try to bring you down. Of course, trilobites would prove to be a hard code to crack, but gradually over time, as players adopted new anti-trilobite strategies, their viability went downhill. Ottoia was perhaps one of the game's first camper builds. Ottoia's strategy was simple yet effective. Make a U-shaped tunnel, then wait for an unsuspecting player to come by them, then ambush them with your extended hitbox. So effective, in fact, that 1% of the player base in some areas was mainly Ottoia main. During a time when most builds had very simple eyes, Ottoia standing out as one of the stealthiest, and this strategy made them extremely hard to counter by most builds. Most except the Radiodonts, and their poster boy is, no more foreshadowing, Anomalocaris. Its power stat was so high, even trilobites didn't stand a chance. It was huge, easily being 1 meter long, making it basically impossible to defeat. It even had very complex eyes, which rivaled dragonflies. Hold up, Anomalocaris can't crush trilobite shells? Data miners also found out that Anomalocaris smaller than previously thought. So this means even some trilobites were bigger than it? I mean, it was pretty fast. This means that it wasn't the apex predator we thought it was. Don't be too disappointed though, because there's still one predator that was even cooler than that Anomalocaris was, Amplectobulea. It was easily the biggest thing ever during the Cambrian period, as a carcasses that came until the Ordovician expansion. It didn't have a crushing bite either, but made up for it with serrated fangs. Caryosyntrips, as an honorable mention, wasn't as big as Amplectobulea, but was still bigger than Anomalocaris. Actually had a crushing bite, can crack through trilobites. Overall, I really want to just thank you guys for listening all the way through. This is my longest video yet, and I'm really proud of it. So overall, stay tuned and do your own research.